The other thing I've been telling young men is that, and this is something I think that you could relate to tremendously, is I read this New Testament line, well, decades ago, and I could never understand it. The line is, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I thought, there's something wrong with that line. It just doesn't make sense to me. Meek just doesn't seem to me to be a moral virtue. And the line, the meek shall inherit the earth, meek is not a good translation, or the word has moved in the 300 years or so since it was translated. What it means is this: those who have swords and know how to use them, but keep them sheathed, will inherit the world. And that's another thing I've been telling. Yeah, no kidding. That's a lot different, man. That's a big difference. It's so great. And so, like, one of the things I tell young men, well, and young women as well, but the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no, wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
Do you know the expression, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war?
Right, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And so when I tell young men that, they think, well, lots of them are competitive. They're low in agreeableness, you know, because that's part of being competitive temperamentally. It's like, is there something wrong with being competitive? There's nothing wrong with it. There's something wrong with cheating. There's something wrong with being a tyrant. There's something wrong with winning unfairly. All of those things are bad. But you don't want people to win? What's the difference between trying to win and striving? You want to eradicate striving? One of the things that I've outlined in 12 Rules for Life is a theory of meaning. Because meaning, as far as I'm concerned, the sense of meaningful engagement is the antidote to malevolence and suffering, essentially. Because you want to have a life that's so engaging that you think, despite the fact that I'm limited and that we're mortal and that life is tragedy and there's evil in the world, despite all that, this is worth doing. And I think that there's a technical meaning that genuinely exists, and that's the meaning that you get when you're in a domain where you have some discipline and some skill. So you're laying out your competence and your ability, but you're simultaneously pushing yourself to develop past where you are. That's really engrossing. And what that is doing is expanding your competence. And so life is suffering and betrayal in many senses of the word. But you can adopt a way of traversing through life that is more powerful than the tragedy and the malevolence.
I agree, and I say to many people that what is going on in your life is you have a series of human reward systems that are in your body, encoded in your body, in your genetics, and it's the reason why human beings survived to 2018. And in order to be happy, you have to feed those things. You have to feed all of them. You have to feed the one that wants to overcome difficult tasks. You have to feed the one that wants to solve problems. You have to feed the one that wants to be with a loving tribe of people that you care about. You have to feed the one that wants to procreate. You have to feed all of these things. You have to feed the love. You have to feed the competition. You have to feed the discipline. And that, to me, is the only way to stay balanced. Or with me, with my body and my mind, that's the only way I've been able to stay balanced. And when any of those things get out of whack, I get out of whack.
Yeah, well, so part of that is, so imagine this. So imagine that you're this loose collection of all these things that need to be gratified, that need to be fed. It's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it biologically. Okay, so now you have to conjure up a mode of being that satisfies all those necessities simultaneously. But then, and this is a technical explanation of why the postmodernist insistence that there's an infinite number of explanations turns out to be wrong, an infinite number of interpretations. There's a very finite number of viable interpretations. So the first constraint is exactly what you just said. You have these inner demons, let's say, all of which need to be satisfied. But they need to be satisfied in a very particular way. Not only do they need to be satisfied today, but they need to be satisfied today in a way that doesn't interfere with satisfying them next week, next month, next year, and in a decade. So, because there's no point in you betraying your future self to gratify your present self.
Right.
It's a stupid game. Okay, so you're constrained by the necessity of satisfying yourself, but of maintaining that satisfaction across time. But then it gets even worse. That's hard enough. But it's like there's an infinite number of yous extending indefinitely into the future, and all of them have to be satisfied simultaneously. But then it's worse because it isn't just you. You have to figure out how to gratify all those internal demons in a sustainable way, in a way that other people not only don't object to, but probably help you with, and that benefits them at the same time. Well, then you think, well, there just aren't that many ways of solving that problem. And we know some of them. One of them is reciprocity. You know, like if you go out of your way for me, it's incumbent on me to notice that and to attempt in some manner to repay you. And like if we're good friends, that's what we'll do. If we're good brothers, that's what we'll do. That's what you do with your wife. It's a reciprocal arrangement. And that keeps things flowing properly across time. So there is an ethic. This is the answer to the postmodern conundrum. It's like, well, is life meaningless? Is everything just nihilist? Is nihilism the right answer? Or maybe, you know, what would you call identification with an ideology as a counterposition to nihilism? So nihilism is wrong. Life is meaningful. And that's what 12 Rules for Life is about. The first meaning of life is suffering and malevolence. There's indisputable realities. Okay? Well, what's after that? Well, there's a noble way of being that allows you to exist properly despite that, and also not to make it worse. So can your life be meaningful enough so that you, what is it? Confront chaos voluntarily. Establish and revivify order. Constrain malevolence. That's a good 3-part doctrine for life. There's things to do. And so that's what I've been talking to the audiences that I've been seeing over the last year. It's like, get your act together. Stand up forthrightly. That's rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. There's a vulnerable position, right? Because you're open. But it's a powerful position because it means that you're brave enough to take what's coming. And it isn't like what's coming isn't dangerous. It's dangerous. So, but your best bet is to be dancing on your feet and ready for it. Pay attention and be awake. And to treat yourself properly. That's rule 2. Is figure out how to treat yourself as if you're someone worth coming to the aid of. To detach yourself in a bit and say, okay, I'm going to set up my life so that it's good for me and good for other people as well. That's a corollary to that. So the book is all about the meanings of life, the negative meanings, suffering, malevolence. Those are indisputable realities. And then a motive being that integrates the sorts of things that you were talking about, these underlying needs, with everyone else's, and like doing that voluntarily. It's a call to responsibility and meaning. And I actually think it's not the thing that's been so exciting for me for the last 3 decades, looking into these things, is that I believe that there is a genuine human ethic. It's not arbitrary. It has to do with reciprocity, for example. It has to do with honesty. That's another thing, is that you should speak the truth. Because your life turns out better if you speak the truth. And so does everyone else's. So in this biblical lecture series I did, I looked at the first chapter in Genesis, and there's a theory in there. It's a really interesting theory. And the theory is that there's 3 parts to being. There's chaos and potential. And that would be like the potential you should live up to. Because everyone says, well, you should live up to your potential. It's like, what the hell's that? You can't measure it, or touch it, or taste it, or feel it. It's this hypothetical thing that everyone regards as real. It's like the future. What's the future? Well, it's not here yet. You can't measure it. What makes you think it's real? Well, we act as if it's real, and that seems to work. So there's potential. That's one. That's chaos, chaotic potential. Then there's order, and that's the structure that you need in order to confront the chaos. And you'd be born with that biologically. And then there's your ability to call forth from the potential new order. And that's what you do with your speech. And that's what happens in the first chapter of Genesis, is that God order, let's say, uses the power of truthful speech, that's the logos, to transform potential into order. And that's what people are made in the image of. So there's this theory, it's a lovely theory that's laid out right at the beginning of the Bible, that says that if you tell the truth, you transform the potential of being into a habitable actuality. That's how it works. So you say, well, how do you make the world better? Tell the truth. Because the world you bring into being as a consequence of telling the truth will be a good world. And I believe that's true. I think it's true metaphorically. I think it's true theologically. And I think it's true like at the practical and scientific level as well. I think it's true on all those levels simultaneously. So that's been ridiculously exciting to sort through.